The air in the dusty boot was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 Saturday nights. It smelled of spilled beer, sawdust, and a cloying cherry-scented disinfectant that wasn't fooling anyone. It was a symphony of things I actively avoided. Yet there I was, nursing a lukewarm club soda, a wilting lime bobbing at the surface like a tiny green shipwreck. My friend, Clara, who possessed a boundless and often misguided enthusiasm for my social life, had dragged me here. Her reasoning was that my apartment was starting to develop a hermit-like energy and that I needed to experience the raw, untamed spirit of the common folk. Apparently, the common folk wore a lot of plaid and had an unshakable faith in the choreography of Shania Twain. I was an observer by nature and by trade. As a data analyst, I spent my days finding patterns in chaos, translating sprawling sets of numbers into clean, digestible narratives. I liked order. I liked predictability. The scene before me was a riot of unpredictable variables. Bodies swirled and stomped on the worn wooden dance floor, a chaotic mess of flailing limbs and earnest concentration, all under the command of one man. He was on a small, elevated stage, a microphone in one hand, the other resting casually on his hip. He wasn't what I'd expected. I'd pictured an older man, maybe, with a beer belly and a bolo tie. This man was not that. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of his dark denim shirt. His hair was the color of dark honey, a little too long, falling across his brow as he leaned into the microphone. But it was his voice that held the room. It was a low, smooth baritone, a warm current of sound that cut through the cacophony of stomping boots and drunken laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was confident. It didn't demand attention. It simply assumed it would be given. And a grapevine to the right, 2, 3, 4. Heel, and cross, and hold. He moved with an easy grace that belied the complexity of the steps he was calling. He wasn't just directing them. He was dancing with them, his own boots tapping out the rhythm on the stage, a subtle, perfect echo of the crowd. I watched him for a long time, longer than I meant to. I analyzed the way he smiled when a group of women in the front row finally nailed a difficult transition. It wasn't a performer's smile, wide and vacant. It was smaller, a genuine crinkle at the corners of his eyes that suggested he took a quiet pride in their success. I watched the way he'd tip his head back slightly when he laughed at a joke from the bartender, a flash of a strong column of throat. I was cataloging details, storing them away like data points, trying to build a narrative for a man I didn't know. It was a habit I couldn't break. "You're staring," Clara said, sliding back into the booth and nudging my knee with hers. "His name's Jackson. He's here every weekend. Kind of a local legend." I pulled my gaze away, feeling a hot flush creep up my neck. I wasn't staring. I was observing the cultural dynamics of a regional social gathering. Clara snorted into her beer. "Right. And I'm just here for the artisanal craft beverages. Leo, he's hot. It's okay to admit it. You're allowed to find people attractive." I took a pointed sip of my club soda. "I'm just not a line dancing person." "Nobody is a line dancing person until they're a line dancing person," she said, her logic as infuriating as it was unassailable. "Come on. One dance. It's a new one. He's teaching it now. Everyone's going to be terrible. You'll fit right in." Before I could formulate a protest grounded in logic and social anxiety, she had my hand and was pulling me toward the floor. It was a magnetic pull I was too tired to resist. The world dissolved into a blur of plaid and denim. I felt like a foreign object, a misfiled piece of data in a system I didn't understand. The music was loud, a generic country pop song about trucks and whiskey and lost love. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, though I knew rationally no one was paying me any attention. They were all looking at him. At Jackson. He was starting a new song, explaining the steps. His voice washed over me, but the words didn't connect. My brain, usually so adept at processing information, had short-circuited. I was trying to mirror the people around me, but I was a beat behind, a clumsy echo of their movements. I turned left when they turned right. I scuffed when they stomped. It was a disaster. I was a walking, stumbling embodiment of awkwardness. I could feel Clara laughing beside me, but it was a kind laugh. I was so focused on my feet, on the sheer humiliation of my own lack of coordination, that I didn't see the ripple of confusion spread through the line. I just felt the momentum shift, the the collective rhythm faltering like a skipping record. There was a moment of chaotic shuffling. And then, everything stopped. Jackson was standing in front of me, not on the stage, but on the floor, right in front of me. He had jumped down, his boots making a solid, definitive thud on the floorboards. He'd missed a call, or called it wrong, I realized later. The entire line had dissolved into a confused mess, a jumble of bodies facing the wrong direction. He was trying to fix it, to get the rhythm back, and I was the unfortunate soul standing directly in his path. His eyes met mine. They were a startling shade of green, like moss after a rain. For a split second, I saw a flicker of something, amusement, maybe frustration. Then it was gone, replaced by a focused calm. He didn't say a word to the crowd. He just looked at me. And then his hand was on my waist. It wasn't a tentative touch. It was firm, confident. His palm was broad and warm, the heat of it seeping through the thin cotton of my shirt, a sudden, shocking point of contact in the swirling chaos. My entire nervous system lit up. All the noise of the bar, the music, the laughter, it all faded into a distant hum. The only data point my brain could process was the weight of his hand, the slight pressure of his fingers against the curve of my hip. He leaned in close, his voice a low murmur meant only for me, but it felt like it vibrated through my entire skeleton. "Follow me," he said. The words were simple, a command. "Don't let go." He didn't wait for an answer. His other hand found my shoulder, and he turned me, guiding my body as if it were an extension of his own. He moved, and I moved with him. Step, together, step, heel toe. My feet, which moments before had been clumsy, useless appendages, suddenly knew what to do. I wasn't thinking. I was just following. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the solid presence of him guiding me, to the rhythm he was creating not with his voice, but with his body. He was the anchor, and I was tethered to him. He led the entire floor from my spot in the line, using me as the pivot point to reset the entire dance. It probably only lasted for 30 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. When the line was reestablished and moving in sync, he gave my waist a final, gentle squeeze and stepped back. His hand lingered for a fraction of a second too long before it dropped away, and the absence of his touch was as shocking as its arrival. He gave me a small, unreadable smile, a quick nod, and then he was back on the stage as if nothing had happened. "All right, now, from the top." "Grapevine right," his voice boomed, full of its earlier easy confidence. The music swelled, and the dance resumed. But I was frozen. My feet were rooted to the floor. My skin still tingled where he had touched me. I could feel the ghost of his palm against my shirt. "Don't let go." The words echoed in my head. It was a simple instruction for a dance step, a practical command in a moment of chaos. But my heart was hammering against my ribs, and I knew, with the kind of certainty I usually reserved for statistical analysis, that it was already too late. I stumbled back to the booth, my legs feeling unsteady. Clara was grinning, her eyes sparkling with a triumphant, "I told you so" glint. "See? You're a natural." I sank onto the vinyl seat, picking up my glass of water and draining it in one go. I was a disaster. "No, you were the star of the show. The dance caller himself had to personally rescue you. That's practically a country music video plot right there," she waggled her eyebrows. "And I saw the way he looked at you. He looked at me like I was a broken piece of machinery that needed fixing." I mumbled, but my voice lacked conviction. I couldn't get the feeling of his hand out of my mind. It was a phantom limb, a warm pressure that had imprinted itself on my skin. I risked a glance toward the stage. Jackson was back in his element, calling out steps, his body moving with the music. But as he turned, his eyes swept the room, and for a fleeting second, they landed on our booth. On me. His gaze held for no more than a heartbeat, but it was enough. There was no discernible expression on his face, just a quiet, steady look. And then he turned away, his attention back on the dancers. My brain went into overdrive. I began to analyze the interaction, breaking it down into its component parts. Variable A, the accidental touch. A purely functional, non-personal event designed to restore order. Probability, high. Variable B, the lingering gaze. A subconscious acknowledgement of a prior interaction, devoid of deeper meaning. Probability, also high. Variable C, the possibility that Clara was right and there was something more, a flicker of interest in his moss-green eyes, a deliberate pressure in his touch that went beyond mere instruction. Probability, statistically insignificant. And yet, I spent the next hour engaged in what I told myself was ethnographic research. I watched Jackson. I watched the way he moved, a fluid economy of motion that spoke of a deep, physical confidence I couldn't begin to comprehend. I watched the way he interacted with the regulars, a quick wink for an older woman who fanned herself dramatically after a fast-paced song, a shared laugh with a burly man who clapped him on the shoulder. He was the sun, and everyone in this little universe orbited him. He was gravitational. Clara eventually got dragged away by a group of her friends for a more complicated dance, leaving me to my observations. The crowd thinned a little as the night wore on. The hardcore dancers remained, but the periphery was quieter. I was just about to text Clara that I was calling it a night when a shadow fell over my table. "You survived." I looked up. It was Jackson. He was standing there, holding 2 sweating bottles of beer. He looked different up close, without the stage lights. There were fine lines around his eyes, and a faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He looked real. My mouth went dry. Barely. I managed to say, my voice coming out as a croak. He gave that same small, genuine smile. It transformed his face, softening the confident set of his jaw. My fault. I skipped a beat in the call. Threw everyone off. He placed one of the beers on the table in front of me. "Peace offering." "Oh, I don't. I was just drinking club soda," my mind raced. It was a test. A simple social offering. Rejecting it would be rude. Accepting it would imply what? That I was staying? That I wanted to have a beer with him. "I know," he said, his gaze steady. "But you looked like you could use a real drink after that." He sat down in the booth opposite me without waiting for an invitation, sliding in with an easy grace. He took a long swallow from his own bottle, his throat working. I watched the movement, mesmerized. "I'm Jackson, by the way." "Leo," I said, my hand hovering uncertainly over the cold bottle. "Leo," he tested the name on his tongue, his voice a low rumble. It sounded different when he said it. More substantial. "So, Leo, you're not from around here." It wasn't a question. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, a weak attempt at humor. "You're the only man in here wearing shoes without a heel and a shirt with all its buttons done up." He gestured vaguely at my plain blue button-down. "And you've been watching everything all night like you're studying for an exam." The accuracy of his observation sent another flush of heat to my face. "I'm a data analyst. I notice patterns." It sounded like a ridiculously flimsy excuse, even to my own ears. Jackson didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, taking another sip of his beer. His eyes, that intense green, were fixed on me. "Patterns," he repeated. "What kind of patterns have you been noticing tonight?" The question hung in the air between us. It was a loaded question. He was asking about more than just the dances. He knew I'd been watching him. He was calling me out on it, but not in an aggressive way. It was a gentle probe, an invitation to be honest. My heart was doing a frantic, unchoreographed dance of its own. I could lie. I could make something up about crowd dynamics or social rituals. It was the safe, logical thing to do. But I was tired of being safe. I was tired of observing from a distance. I finally reached out and wrapped my hand around the cold, damp bottle of beer. The condensation felt cool against my nervous skin. I met his gaze. "I noticed," I began, my voice steadier now, "that you're very good at your job. You make something that's very complicated look easy. And you seem to genuinely enjoy it." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. He held my gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching out between us, filled only by the distant thump of the bass from the speakers. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a weighted one. He was considering my words, really hearing them. "Most people just see the stomping," he said finally, his voice quiet. "They don't see the math." The math. The word was a lifeline, pulling me back to familiar territory. Every dance is a sequence. 8 counts, 32 beats. It's all patterns. You just have to find the rhythm underneath. He tapped his fingers on the table, a quiet, perfect beat. "Guess you and I do similar work, Leo. We just use different data sets." And just like that, the barrier between us seemed to dissolve. We weren't a dance caller and an awkward tourist anymore. We were just 2 people talking, finding an unexpected patch of common ground in a noisy, crowded bar. We talked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 45 minutes. He asked me about my job, and for once, When I explained it, his eyes didn't glaze over. He listened, asking questions that were surprisingly insightful. He seemed to understand the satisfaction of taking something messy and finding the elegant, simple truth hidden within it. I learned that he owned a small ranch just outside of town, that the dance calling was just a weekend gig he'd fallen into because he had a good memory for steps and a voice that carried. He spoke about his horses with a gentle fondness that was completely at odds with the confident persona he projected on stage. In that booth, under the dim lights of the dusty boot, I saw a different man. Quieter, more thoughtful. As the bar started to empty and the staff began stacking chairs, a sense of panic began to set in. This was it. The interaction was ending. I would go back to my quiet apartment, and he would go back to his ranch, and this night would become just another anomalous data point in my life. The thought left a hollow ache in my chest. Clara appeared, a little drunk and a lot happy, ready to leave. I stood up, my muscles stiff. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Jackson." The words felt horribly formal, inadequate. "You too, Leo." He stood as well, and for a moment, we were just standing there, a foot of space between us that felt both vast and incredibly small. Clara, in her infinite, unsubtle wisdom, chose that moment to chime in. "Oh, Jackson, you live out past Miller's Creek, right? You're heading right past Leo's rental cottage. You could save him an expensive cab ride." Mortification washed over me. "Clara, no, I can get a cab. It's fine." "It's no trouble," Jackson said, his voice cutting smoothly through my flustered protests. His eyes were on me, that unreadable expression back in place. "My truck's right out front. I'd be happy to give you a lift." The offer was there. A simple, practical solution. But it felt like something much bigger. It was a continuation. A choice. My analytical brain screamed at me to decline, to retreat to the safety of anonymity. A cab was predictable. A ride with Jackson was a variable I couldn't quantify. I looked at him, at the quiet confidence in his stance, at the patient look in his green eyes. And for the first time all night, I ignored the screaming logic in my head. "Okay," I said, the word barely a whisper. "Thank you." The cab of Jackson's truck was a world unto itself. It smelled of leather, hay, and a faint, clean scent that I guessed was just him. It was a stark contrast to the stale air of the bar. The dashboard was dusty, and a worn pair of leather gloves was tossed on the console between us. It felt intimate, a private space that he had allowed me to enter. The drive started in silence. The radio was off, and the only sounds were the low rumble of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires as we pulled out of the parking lot. The darkness of the country road enveloped us, the headlights cutting a lonely path through the trees. I sat stiffly, my hands clasped in my lap, hyper-aware of his presence beside me. He drove with one hand on the wheel, his other arm resting on the open window, the cool night air ruffling his sleeve. I could feel him glancing at me occasionally. I kept my own eyes fixed on the road ahead, but I could sense his gaze, a tangible pressure on the side of my face. The silence wasn't comfortable anymore. It was charged, filled with all the things we hadn't said back at the bar. "So," he said, his voice startlingly loud in the quiet cab. "A data analyst." "Yes," I confirmed, my voice tight. "Must be a quiet job." "It is," I said. "I like quiet." As soon as the words were out, I regretted them. It sounded like a dismissal, a reinforcement of the hermit-like energy Clara was so worried about. "Nothing wrong with quiet," he said, and his voice was gentle. "My place is quiet. Sometimes too quiet." Another silence fell. This one felt different. He had offered a small piece of himself, a tiny admission of loneliness that mirrored my own. I felt a sudden, urgent need to reciprocate, to bridge the gap that my own defensiveness had created. "You were watching me all night," he said, his voice still quiet, but the words were a direct hit. He wasn't accusing. He was just stating a fact. My breath hitched. There was no point in denying it. "Yes." He waited. He didn't push, didn't ask the obvious why. He just let my admission hang in the air, giving me the space to explain if I wanted to. The choice was mine. It was terrifying. I turned my head to look at him for the first time since we'd gotten in the truck. In the dim green glow of the dashboard lights, his profile was strong and steady. His focus was on the road, but I knew he was listening with his entire being. "I've never seen anyone do what you do," I began, the words coming out in a rush. The way you hold the attention of an entire room. The way you connect with them. It's a skill I don't have. I'm good with numbers, with things that are logical and predictable. People are not. I trailed off, feeling foolish. People are just a different kind of pattern, he said, his eyes still on the road. They're messy, unpredictable, but they're not random. You just have to watch them long enough to see the rhythm. He paused, then added, "You're a good watcher, Leo." The compliment landed somewhere deep in my chest, warm and unsettling. He saw me. He didn't just see an awkward man in the wrong kind of shirt. He saw the way my mind worked. He turned onto the small gravel road that led to the cottage I was renting. He slowed the truck to a crawl, the headlights illuminating the small wooden porch. He pulled to a stop, but didn't turn off the engine. The low rumble was the only thing holding the silence at bay. This was it, the end of the line. "Well," I said, my hand on the door handle. "Thanks again for the ride, Leo." I stopped, my hand frozen on the latch. I turned back to him. He had shifted in his seat, turning to face me fully. His expression was serious, the easy charm stripped away, leaving something raw and vulnerable in its place. The dashboard lights carved shadows into his face, making his eyes seem darker, deeper. "That stumble on the dance floor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one that messed up the whole line. What about it?" I asked, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He held my gaze, and in that moment, I felt like the only person in the world. "I didn't miss the call," he said. "I've been calling that dance for 5 years. I could do it in my sleep." The world tilted on its axis. My carefully constructed narrative, my logical analysis of the night's events, it all shattered into a million pieces. Variable A, the accidental touch. Probability, 0. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. He had chosen to create chaos, and in that chaos, he had chosen to reach for me. I couldn't speak. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean of all data. All I could do was stare at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was telling me. "I saw you when you walked in," he continued, his voice low and steady, a confession in the dark. "You were standing by the bar, trying so hard to be invisible, and I couldn't stop looking. And when your friend dragged you onto the floor, you looked so lost. I wanted an excuse. An excuse. To talk to me. To touch me." The air in the cab became thick, heavy, charged with unspoken energy. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in my ears. He wasn't moving, wasn't reaching for me. He was waiting. He had laid his cards on the table, a gesture of terrifying honesty, and now he was waiting for me to play my hand. I think of my life. My quiet, ordered, lonely life. The predictable patterns, the safe routines. I could open the door, get out, and go back to that life. It would be easy. It would be safe. Or I could stay. I could choose the unpredictable variable. I could choose the chaos. My hand falls from the door handle. I am not a man of action. I am a man of thought, of analysis. But in this moment, thought fails me. There is only a feeling, a deep, magnetic pull toward the man sitting a foot away from me. A feeling that started with the warmth of his hand on my waist. So I do the only thing that makes sense. I lean across the console. The movement feels slow, deliberate, as if I'm moving through water. He doesn't move toward me, but he doesn't pull away. His eyes never leave mine, and in their green depths, I see a reflection of my own yearning, my own fear. I stop when our faces are inches apart. I can feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. He smells of the night air and something else, something warm and masculine that is uniquely him. And then, he closes the distance. His lips are not what I expected. They are soft, hesitant at first. It is not a kiss of passion, of pent-up demand. It is a question, a quiet, tentative exploration. My own lips part slightly, an answer, and then the pressure deepens. His hand comes up, not to my waist this time, but to my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin just below my ear. The touch is electric. A shiver runs through me, a current of pure sensation. This is not data. This is not a pattern. This is real. This is happening. I bring my own hand up, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at the nape of his neck. The kiss changes. It becomes more confident, more certain. It's a discovery, a mapping of new territory. It's the silent, honest conversation we couldn't have with words. It tastes of beer and bravery and a loneliness so profound it could only be recognized by its twin. It is the most honest thing I have ever done. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I can feel the steady thrum of his pulse through the hand still on my neck. The engine of the truck is still rumbling, a low, constant vibration beneath us, but it's the only sound. "Leo," he whispers, his voice rough with emotion. I can't form a reply. I just keep my eyes closed, trying to commit every sensation to memory. The feel of his skin, the scent of him, the lingering taste of the kiss. He stayed. We didn't talk about it. After the kiss, after the long moment of resting our foreheads together in the rumbling cab of his truck, the words simply weren't there. He turned off the engine, plunging us into a profound silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. He walked me to the door of the small rental cottage. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking slightly. He took them from me, his fingers brushing against mine, and unlocked the door with a steady, practiced ease. He pushed it open, then handed the keys back. "Good night, Leo," he said, his voice soft in the darkness. I stood there, in the doorway, my mind a blank, buzzing static. The script for this moment did not exist in my carefully curated library of social interactions. He was going to leave. He would walk back to his truck and drive away, and the night would end, and I would be left alone with the ghost of his kiss and 1,000 new variables I had no idea how to process. "Don't," I said. The word was out before I could stop it. It was small, pathetic, a plea. He stopped on the top step of the porch, his back to me. He didn't turn around for a long moment. I held my breath, the silence stretching into an eternity. Then, slowly, he turned. In the dim yellow light from the porch lamp, his face was a mask of shadows and uncertainty. "Okay," he said, "just that one word." He followed me inside. The cottage was small, just a living room and a bedroom. It was impersonal, filled with the generic furniture of a temporary life. He looked out of place in it, too large, too real for the bland, beige surroundings. We stood awkwardly in the middle of the small living room, the space between us charged with a new kind of tension. The explosive energy of the confession had dissipated, leaving a quiet, humming uncertainty in its wake. "I only have one bed," I said, the statement sounding both practical and ridiculously forward. "That's okay," he said. "The couch is fine." "No, I trailed off, not sure what I meant. He gave me a small, tired smile. "Leo, it's okay. Let's just not think for a minute." He was right. My brain was exhausted from overanalysis. I found a spare blanket and a pillow in the closet and handed them to him. He took them, his fingers brushing mine again. Every touch felt significant, a tiny aftershock from the earthquake of the kiss. He made up the couch without a word, and I retreated to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. I lay in bed for hours, wide awake, listening. I could hear the faint sound of him shifting on the couch, the soft sigh of his breathing. A man I had met only hours ago was sleeping in my living room. A man who had orchestrated a moment of chaos just to have an excuse to touch me. A man I had kissed with a desperation that frightened me. I fell asleep to the sound of his steady presence in the next room, and for the first time in a long time, my quiet, orderly world did not feel lonely. I woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, I was disoriented, my brain struggling to place the rich, dark aroma in the context of my temporary, beige life. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back in a tidal wave of memory and anxiety. Jackson. He was still here. He had made coffee. I am not a graceful morning person. I am a creature of routine. I require at least 20 minutes of silent contemplation before I am capable of human interaction. The thought of facing him, of navigating the morning after conversation, filled me with a primal dread. What did one say? What were the rules? My internal database had no file for this scenario. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, ran a hand through my messy hair, and took a deep breath before opening the bedroom door. He was in the tiny kitchen, his back to me, leaning against the counter. He was wearing the same jeans and denim shirt from last night, though the shirt was unbuttoned over a plain white t-shirt. He looked impossibly, ruggedly domestic as he held a mug in both hands, staring out the small window above the sink. The blanket and pillow from the couch were neatly folded on a chair, order in the midst of my emotional chaos. He must have heard the floorboard creak, because he turned his head. His expression was neutral, his green eyes watchful. The easy smile from the bar was gone. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rumble. "There's coffee." "Thanks," I mumbled, avoiding his eyes. I moved to the counter, my movements stiff and awkward, and poured myself a mug. The silence was deafening. It was a completely different silence from the one in the truck, that had been charged with tension and possibility. This was thick with uncertainty and the potential for regret. My regret. His regret. I was spiraling, my mind creating a dozen different scenarios, each one ending with him giving me a polite, pitying smile and walking out the door forever. We stood there, on opposite sides of the small kitchen, drinking our coffee in a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I stared into the black depths of my mug, as if it held the answers to the universe. I needed to say something. I needed to break the tension before it suffocated me. I risked a glance at him. He was watching me, his gaze intense, analytical. It was the same look I had seen him give the dance floor, a look of concentration, of trying to find the pattern. It occurred to me, with a jolt, that he might be just as uncertain as I was. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. The confident, charming dance caller was gone, replaced by this quiet, watchful man. He was the one who broke the silence. "So," he said, setting his mug down on the counter with a soft click, "are you going to analyze this, or are we going to talk about it?" The question was direct, with no room for evasion. It was a challenge. "I'm still gathering data," I said, my attempt at a joke falling completely flat in the tense air. He didn't smile. He just kept looking at me, waiting. "Leo, last night was..." I started, but I had no words to finish the sentence. "Unexpected, terrifying, wonderful." He pushed off from the counter and took a step toward me. Then another. He stopped when he was standing directly in front of me, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. He was so much taller than me. I had to tip my head back to meet his gaze. "I don't do things like that," he said, his voice low and serious. "I don't orchestrate things. I don't lie to people to get what I want." He paused, and I saw a flash of vulnerability in his eyes, a flicker of the same fear that was churning in my own stomach. "But I have never in my life wanted an excuse to talk to someone as much as I wanted one to talk to you." His honesty was a physical force. It stripped away all my defenses, all my carefully constructed walls of logic and analysis. All that was left was the raw, terrifying truth of my own feelings. He reached out, not to touch me, but to take my coffee mug from my trembling hands. He set it on the counter behind me, his movements slow and deliberate. Then his hands came up to cup my face, his palms warm and slightly rough against my skin. His thumbs stroked my cheekbones, a gentle, reassuring gesture. "I woke up this morning on your couch," he whispered, his eyes searching mine. "And my first thought was that I had dreamed all of it. And my second thought was that I hoped I hadn't." He took a deep breath. "I'm not sorry about last night, Leo. Are you?" The question was the final variable, the one that would determine the outcome of the entire equation. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The fear of rejection, of vulnerability, of getting this wrong. But looking up at him, at the raw honesty in his face, another feeling was stronger. Hope. A fragile, tentative hope that this man, this impossible man, might just see me. Really see me. I shook my head slowly, my cheek rubbing against his palm. "No," I whispered, the word feeling inadequate but profoundly true. "I'm not sorry." A slow smile spread across his face. Not the charming performer's smile, but the small, genuine one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. It was like the sun breaking through the clouds. The tension in the room dissolved, replaced by a warm, quiet relief. He leaned down and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the first. There was no desperation, no frantic discovery. It was slow and soft and full of a quiet certainty. It was a confirmation, a reassurance. It was the beginning of a new pattern, one I didn't need to analyze to understand. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. The rest of the morning passed in a gentle, dreamlike state. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a comfortable, quiet intimacy. We made breakfast together, a clumsy dance in the tiny kitchen. I learned that he was terrible at cracking eggs, but made surprisingly good toast. I found myself laughing, a real, unforced laugh that felt foreign and wonderful in my own chest. He told me more about his ranch, about the old farmhouse he was slowly restoring by himself. He spoke of the quiet satisfaction of physical labor, of fixing what was broken with his own two hands. I told him about my life in the city, the sterile quiet of my apartment, the predictable rhythm of my days. I told him things I had never told anyone, things I barely admitted to myself. He listened, his attention absolute, making me feel like the most interesting person in the world. There was a moment, as we were sitting at the small table, the sunlight streaming through the window, that I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. This was temporary. I was here for 2 more weeks, a short-term project for a local company. Then I would go back to my life, and he would stay here, in his. This idyllic morning was just a beautiful, fleeting anomaly. The thought must have shown on my face, because he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice gentle. I hesitated, then decided that there was no room for anything but honesty between us. "I leave in 2 weeks," I said, my voice quiet. He didn't pull his hand away. His thumb just rubbed slow circles on the back of my hand. "I know," he said. 2 weeks is a long time. And it's a short time." He met my eyes, his gaze steady and serious. "Let's not waste it by analyzing the ending before we've even figured out the beginning." His words were a gift. He was offering me the present moment, free from the weight of the future and the baggage of the past. He was offering me a chance to simply be. It was a terrifying and exhilarating prospect. Later that day, he took me to his ranch. It was a few miles further down the road, a sprawling property of rolling green hills and ancient oak trees. The farmhouse was just as he described it, a beautiful old structure in a state of dignified disrepair. It was a work in progress, much like its owner. He showed me the barn, introducing me to his 2 horses, a calm, steady mare named Daisy and a spirited gelding named Blue. He moved around them with a quiet confidence, his hands gentle, his voice a low, soothing murmur. He took me to a spot on a hill overlooking the entire property. We sat on the cool grass, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the tall grass and the distant call of a hawk. The sun was warm on my skin. Beside me, Jackson was a solid, reassuring presence. "This is my favorite spot," he said, his voice soft. "When things get too loud in my head, I come up here. It's quiet. You can see the patterns." I looked out at the landscape, at the neat lines of the fences, the gentle curve of the creek, the sprawling, chaotic beauty of the woods beyond. He was right. There was a rhythm to it, a logic. It was a different kind of data, but it told a story just the same. I spent the next 2 weeks living in a state of suspended reality. I would work my normal hours, analyzing spreadsheets and building reports from the quiet cottage. But every evening, Jackson's truck would rumble down the gravel drive. Sometimes we would go into the small town for dinner, where he would introduce me to people with a simple, "This is Leo," his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. No one batted an eye. In this small, rural world, I had expected to feel like an outsider. I felt accepted. Other nights, we would stay at his ranch. I would help him with small tasks, handing him tools as he worked on the porch, my analytical mind surprisingly adept at anticipating the next logical step in a repair. We would eat dinner on the rickety porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. We talked for hours, filling in the quiet spaces of each other's lives. And we fell into a physical intimacy that was as natural as breathing. It was never rushed, never demanding. It was a slow, deliberate exploration, a conversation our bodies were having when words were not enough. I learned the map of his body, the scar above his eyebrow, the constellation of freckles across his shoulders. I learned the different sounds of his breathing, the way it deepened when he was asleep, the soft sigh he made when I traced the lines of his palm. He learned my own patterns, the way I worried my lower lip when I was deep in thought, the way I needed quiet in the mornings. He seemed to catalog my details with the same intensity one had once used on him. One night, a few days before I was due to leave, we were lying in his bed, the moonlight filtering through the dusty window panes. The inevitable weight of my departure was a heavy presence in the room. "I don't want you to go," he said, his voice a quiet rumble in the darkness. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "I have to," I whispered. "My job, my apartment, my life is there." "Is it?" he asked, and the simple question hung in the air. Is that a life? Or is it just a pattern you're afraid to break? He was right. My life wasn't a life. It was a carefully constructed set of routines designed to keep me safe from the messy, unpredictable chaos of human connection. It was a fortress of loneliness I had built around myself, brick by brick. And this man, this line-dancing rancher, had breached the walls with a single, deliberate misstep. The day I was supposed to leave arrived, gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the mood in my heart. I had packed my single suitcase. The cottage returned to its impersonal, beige state. Jackson was there, leaning against the doorframe, watching me. He was quiet, his face unreadable. We drove to the small regional airport in a tense, heavy silence. Every mile that passed was a mile closer to the end. When we pulled up to the departure's curb, I couldn't bring myself to move. So this is it, I said, my voice thick. He turned to me, his green eyes dark with an emotion I couldn't name. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. Leo, he said, his voice rough. You could stay. I can't, I said, the words tasting like a lie. I'm a data analyst. What would I do here? You could analyze the patterns of the seasons, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. You could calculate the optimal feed-to-hay ratio for the horses. You could help me figure out the math of rebuilding a life. He leaned in and kissed me, a long, slow, desperate kiss that tasted of coffee and regret. Or you could just be here, with me. It was the most terrifying and beautiful proposition I had ever heard. I got out of the truck. I walked into the airport. I checked my bag. I went through security. Every step was mechanical, a pre-programmed routine. I sat at the gate, staring out at the runway, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I was doing the logical thing, the sensible thing. I was returning to my life. The boarding call was announced. I stood up, my carry-on bag in my hand. I walked toward the gate, one foot in front of the other. It was just a pattern, a simple sequence of movements. But as I stood there, ticket in hand, I thought of Jackson's smile. I thought of the warmth of his hand on my waist. I thought of the quiet satisfaction on his face as he fixed a broken porch step. I thought of him saying, people are just a different kind of pattern. You just have to watch them long enough to see the rhythm. I had been watching my own life for years, and I had never seen a rhythm. It was just static, a flat line. Jackson was rhythm. He was music. I turned around. I walked out of the gate, against the flow of boarding passengers. I walked out of the security area. I walked out of the airport, into the cool, gray air. I stood on the curb, my heart hammering against my ribs, a wild, chaotic, beautiful rhythm. His truck was still there. He was parked a little ways down, just watching the entrance. When he saw me, he got out of the truck, his face a mask of disbelief and hope. I started walking toward him, then running. He met me halfway, and I crashed into him, my arms wrapping around his neck. He held me tight, his arms a solid, grounding force around me, lifting me off my feet. You came back, he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. You told me not to let go, I said, my voice muffled against his shoulder. He set me down, his hands on my shoulders, and looked at me, his green eyes shining. Is that an official data point? I laughed, a real, full-throated laugh that felt like a release. It's the only one that matters. We drove back to his ranch, leaving my old life behind at the airport curb. That night, as we sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, he handed me a small, tarnished silver key. It's not much yet, he said, gesturing to the old farmhouse. It's a work in progress. It's messy. It's unpredictable. He looked at me, his expression open and vulnerable. But it's home, if you want it to be. I took the key, its cool metal a solid, tangible weight in my palm. I looked from the key, to the house, to the man beside me. My analyst's brain, for once, was quiet. There was no need for charts, for graphs, for probabilities. There was only a simple, elegant, undeniable truth. I had found my pattern. I had found my rhythm. I was home.